All right, welcome back, guys. In the last video, we ended up wrapping up our logic for our user and authentication-based logic, and also mentioned in the last video that the next thing we're going to work on is retrieving the listings and also a listing detail, although we do need a way to create a listing in the first place in order to do that. So instead, what we're going to be doing in this video is implementing that logic. So this is going to be an endpoint for a realtor user specifically, and it's going to allow a realtor to create a listing in the app. So that's one endpoint that we're going to make in this video. So we're going to allow a realtor to create a listing, but we're also going to create another endpoint, which is going to be sort of multi-purposed. It's going to allow a realtor to retrieve all the listings that they created, as well as a particular listing that they created. So the way that that endpoint's going to work is you're going to be able to pass an optional query parameter, which is going to be the slug of the listing. If you don't pass that, then you're just going to retrieve all the listings that this realtor created, whether they're published or not, doesn't matter, because they do belong to this realtor. And then if you do pass a slug, then it's just going to pass that particular listing that they created. So the way that you could visualize this, if you had a front-end framework with a nice user interface, perhaps these realtors could have their own user dashboard where then they have a list of all their listings. They could have some sort of button where you can publish, unpublish them. You can click on that listing and then you can see the details. So this endpoint, which is going to be getting the listings, if you don't pass that query parameter of the slug, then you could visualize that as being that list of all of their listings that they created in their dashboard. And then we click on a listing to view the details. Then you could imagine that this endpoint, when you pass that query parameter of the slug, then in their dashboard, they would see all those details and be able to edit them. So that's sort of a way that you can visualize it. So anyway, let's get right into it now. So I'm going to open up this listing app. Open up this views.py. This is where we're going to be working. Also note that I have my backend running and my database, so make sure you're doing the same. And then just to have a little bit more space to work, I'm going to close this terminal, side window, zoom in a bit, just so you guys can see, remove whatever's in here, and let's get working on this. So I'm going to make a class, which is going to be manage listing view. So here I'm going to have all the different functions like the get, the post, and so forth, which is going to deal with the realtor's endpoints. So what we're going to do for now is define a get, and we're also going to have a post. And then this manage listing view, this is going to inherit from API view. That way we can actually utilize these properly. And then I have to make sure I import that. So from REST framework.views, I'm going to import API view. So when we hit the endpoint that we're going to create in a bit, which is going to be something like API/listing/manage. So when we hit it with a get request, then we're going to utilize this manage listing view, and then that's going to hit this function here. And this is going to be responsible for getting the listings. And if a slug is passed in the query parameter, it's going to send back a response with that listing detail. Then this post right here is what we're going to be hitting. So when you hit something like API/listing/manage with a post request, this right here is going to handle the logic for creating a listing. And this is going to only be for realtor users. So we also have to make sure that we implement that authorization inside of here. So first, let's go ahead and pass the parameters that are needed. So self, request, format, none. And then here I'm going to have self and request. And then I'm going to start off with this post request. So we're going to be creating a listing. So another thing I know I need to bring in here is for my .models, I need to bring in my listing model. So that way I can actually create these listings. And then I'm also going to wrap all of this in a try except in case if anything goes wrong during this process of trying to create a listing, then we're just going to return some kind of response. So that's another thing I need to import. So from REST framework.response, I want to import response, and I'm also going to have status code. So from REST framework, I'm also going to import status. And then in this except, if anything goes wrong during this try part of creating this listing, then I'm going to return a response. It's going to have an error. And then this error is just going to say something went wrong when creating listing. And then this is going to be a status of status.http 500 internal server error. And then in this try part, we're going to be retrieving some JSON data. So that's going to be all of the things that we need in order to create a listing. So if we open up this models.py, we have all of this data here that we need to make sure we pass in order to create this listing. Now we don't need to pass all of this stuff as JSON data, but the majority of it we will. So back inside of this view, the very first thing I want to do is retrieve the user who's making this request. So I'm going to do user is request.user. And then I want to make sure that this user is a realtor. So the way that I can do that is have an if check where it's if not user.isRealtor, because this user is going to have this isRealtor flag. And then if this right here is false, the not of false is going to be true. So if we hit this, we know they're not a realtor. So then I can return an error response. So I'm going to have an error, and it's going to say user does not have necessary permissions for creating this listing data. And then for the status, so here we're going to have status.htp 403 forbidden. So if you have something like 401 unauthorized, that just means that the user isn't even logged in. 403 forbidden more means that they are logged in, but they're just not allowed to make this request. So that's why we have a 403 forbidden here instead. Then the next thing I'm going to do is retrieve the data. So I'm going to do that with request.data, store that in a variable called data. And this is how I can retrieve all that JSON data that's going to be sent off when this request is made. So this data, it's going to be a dictionary, and then I'm going to retrieve all those values from this dictionary and store them in separate variables. So I'm going to have one for the title, which is going to come from data title. I'm going to have one for the slug, which is going to be data slug. And then I'm going to be doing this a couple more times. So to make it easier, I'm just going to copy this down a few times. So the next one is going to be for my address. Then I'm going to have the city. Then I'm going to have the state, then the zip code, and then the description. And then the next thing I'm going to grab is the price. So that's going to come from data price. Now this price is going to be an integer, although when we retrieve it from here, it's going to be a string. So we have to convert it to an integer. So we can do that with price is equal to int price. Now this right here could potentially result in a value error, because let's say if this right here was passed as the string hello, so that's something that you cannot convert to an integer. So a good thing to do is wrap this inside of a try except. And then if this happens, we can just return an error. So I can return a response with an error, and it's going to say price must be an integer. And then I can have a status of status.htp 400 bad request. Then after that, I'm going to retrieve the bedrooms. Just going to come from data bedrooms. And this right here is going to be another integer value. So I also have to make sure I convert this to an integer. So to make this easier, I'm just going to grab this right here, paste it below, fix up this indenting. And then this right here is going to be bedrooms. So I'm going to convert the bedrooms to an integer, store it back inside of this bedrooms variable. And then if this goes wrong, then as for my error message, I'm just going to say bedrooms must be an integer. Then after that, we're going to retrieve the bathrooms. So I'm going to do bathrooms as data bathrooms. And then this right here is going to be our decimal value. So we have to convert this to be a float. So again, I'm just going to copy this to make this easier. Paste it right below here. Grab this part, Command D, and change it to be bathrooms. And then instead of converting to an integer, we're going to be converting to a float. And then for the message, I'm just going to say bathrooms must be a floating point value, something like that. And then after we do this conversion, I also want to make sure that the value of this bathrooms is between 0 and 10. The reason for that is because in my models, right here, this bathrooms, I have max digits as 2. So the highest value that we can have is 9.9. And I also want it to be greater than 0. So in order to do that, I'm going to have an if check. It's going to be if bathrooms is less than equal to 0, or bathrooms is greater than equal to 10. If that's the case, then I'm just going to set bathrooms to be 1.0. So that's the way that we can deal with this sort of edge case here. And then another thing I want to deal with is that perhaps the value is between 0 and 10, but it's not rounded to one decimal place. So that's another thing I want to make sure I handle. So I'm going to have bathrooms is round bathrooms, and then I'm going to round it to one decimal place. So that's what this built-in Python function is going to let me do. And then the next thing I want to do is retrieve the sale type. So that's going to come from data sale type. So this is going to be for sale or for rent. And then the way that I want to retrieve this data, it's going to be like so. So for sale like this. So if we go into our model, we have it like this, where it's all in capitals with the underscore, and then the value itself is like this. But the way we want to retrieve it in the JSON data is like this, in all caps with the underscore. So I need to make sure of that. And then the way that we can do that is with an if check. So I'm going to do if sale type is equal to for sale. Then in that case, I'm going to have the sale type be for sale like so. And then here I might actually do the rent first. So I'm going to do for rent instead. And then the next one I'm going to do as for sale. And the reason for that is because this next one I'm just going to have an else case, where then I do sale type is for sale. That way, if they pass something invalid in here, then we just default to for sale. I think that's a good default versus a for rent default value. And then the next piece of data I want to retrieve is the home type. So I'm going to do home type is data home type. And then this right here can be a house, a condo, or a townhouse. So I want to do the same sort of thing I was doing here. So I'm going to have my if check for home type is condo. And again, I want it to be in this all caps format when we retrieve it as JSON data. And then if it's condo, I'm going to set this home type to be condo like this, which is the value itself. So the values are written out like this here. So it's important to have them written out like this. And then I'm going to have an elif. Home type is townhouse. Then I'm going to set home type equal to townhouse, written like this. So it's very important to have this casing correct. And then I'm going to default it to be house. So I'm going to have an else where home type is equal to house. And then after this, I'm going to retrieve my images. So I'm going to do main photo is data main photo. And then I'm going to have photo 1, which is going to be data photo 1. Then I'm going to have photo 2 and 3. So this one here is going to be 2. This one's going to be 3. And then I'm going to have the is published, which is going to be data is published. So there's going to be quite a bit of data passed to this in order to create a listing. And then this is published. It's going to be a Boolean value, although this is going to be a string, so we have to convert it. So I'm going to check if is published is equal to the string true. If that's the case, then is published is going to be the Boolean value true. So that's what we're going to set this to. So we're going to overwrite this value. And then otherwise, and then also this right here should be a double equals because we're doing a comparison. And then by default, is published is going to be set to false. So if this right here is anything but the string value true, exactly like this, will default to false. So meaning the listing is not published. Now, when we're creating these listings, the slugs have to be unique. So a really good thing to do is maybe right after here, I can have a check for if listing dot objects dot filter, where slug is slug dot exists. So if we already have a listing with this slug, then we're just going to return an error response. So I'm going to return a response. It's going to have an error, and it's just going to say listing with this slug already exists. And then this is just going to be a status of status.http 400 bad request. And then after all this, I'm going to move on to here where we actually create the listing itself. So I can do that with listing.objects.create. And then I just have to pass all the values I need. So I'm going to have realtor. And then I can grab this from the user because the user has an email field. So I can just extract that, pass that to this realtor field. I'm going to have title, which is going to be title. I'm going to have slug, which is slug. Address, which is address. City, which is city. State will be state. Zip code will be zip code. Then description. And we'll have a couple more just to make it a little quicker. I'm just going to go here. So we were at description. So we need price, bedrooms, bathroom, sale type, home type, main photo. These interior photos is published. Then this date created is going to have a default, so I don't need that. So I'm just going to copy this right here. Go back into my view, and I'm just going to paste that right below this description and just filter this so that we're passing it along correctly. So I'm going to grab this space equals space bar, do a Command D to select all of them. Then I'm going to do a Shift Command right click, and then that's going to select all of this. And then I can just remove it. I can put in equals, and then I can put in price, comma. And then I'm just going to edit these that follow this price. So this bedrooms, I'm going to have bedrooms here, bathrooms will be bathrooms, and so forth. And there we go. Now we're passing all the values that are needed in order to create this listing. And then the only thing I have to do after this is just return some kind of success response. So I'm going to return a response, and it's going to be success. And this will just say listing created successfully. And then for the status, I'm going to have a status, which is going to be HTTP 201 created. So I'm going to save that. So the next thing I have to do is create an endpoint for this. So I'm going to open up that side window, go into my listing. I'm going to create a urls.py. And then inside of here, I need to import a few things. So from Django.urls, I'm going to import path. I'm going to create that view that I just created. So from .views, I'm going to import that manage listing view. Then I'm going to create this URL patterns. It's going to be a list with a path. And then here, I'm going to bring in this manage listing view. I'm going to do a .as view because this is a class-based view. I'm going to save that, leave it like this for now. I'm going to open up my core, urls.py. And then right below this user, I'm going to do a path, which is going to be API/listing/ and then I'm going to include listing.urls. So right now, to create a listing, we're going to hit API/listing/ make sure to have the slash here, and then manage. And then we're going to hit that with a post request. So API/listing/manage. If we hit that with a post request, then here, we're going to end up hitting this post, where we're going to hit our logic for creating this listing. So now that we have our logic in place, we might as well test it out. So I'm going to go back to Postman, and also I might organize this a little more. So I'm going to create a folder here. This one I'm going to call auth. And then I'm just going to bring all of these inside of there. All right, there we are. This way we keep a little more organized. And I'm going to create another folder. And this one I'm just going to call listing. All right, so everything to do with listings, I'm just going to store inside of here. So let's go ahead, create our first endpoint. So we're going to have HTTP localhost 8000/API/listing/manage. Then I'm going to hit this with a post request. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to put inside of my listing. I'm going to call this create listing. I'm going to save that. So if we hit this as is, here we have authentication credentials were not provided. So let's go ahead and log in. So I need to log in with a Realtor account, because right now if we do this normal account, so I can send off a request here. And this is my register. I meant to open up my login for the normal user. So let's send this off, grab the access token, copy that, go back here, go into my headers, and then pass the authorization header. Then I'm going to have bear, and then that access token, save that, send that off. And then here we go, we get the error where it says user does not have necessary permissions for creating the listing data. And then we get the 403 forbidden. So that is exactly what we expect because this is a normal user. They're not the Realtor user. So let's go ahead and log in with the Realtor user. Then I'm going to grab this access token. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to place it inside of the authorization header. Paste that in there. Send this off. And there we go. We no longer get the 403 unauthorized. Now, instead, we're getting this 500 internal server error because we didn't pass any data, but we're going to do that in a second. But at least this shows that, in fact, we're hitting that endpoint. So to pass this data, here I'm going to have content type, which is going to be application JSON. And then I'm going to go to this body, and then we're going to do form data here. Because with this raw, we have to do it in this sort of format, but we're going to have images. And then in order to pass those images, I need to use this form data. So that's the way I'm going to do it instead. So we need to make sure we pass a title. And then for this, I'm going to do something like 3 South Woodsman Lane. I'm going to have the slug. So it's just going to be this in a slugified format. So it's going to be 3-South-Woodsman-Lane. Then here I'm going to have the address. And then for the address, I'm going to have it the exact same as the title. And then you can always make these titles a little bit different if you want, but in my case, I'm just going to have these be the same. Then I'm going to have the city, which I'm going to set to this. And then I'm going to have my state, which I'm going to set to California. Then I'm going to have my zip code. And then for the zip code, I'll put something like this. And then I'm going to have the description. So for that, I'll do beautiful home with swimming pool. Just keep it simple. Then I'm going to do the price. And the price of this home will be something like $699,999. Then after the price, I'm going to have the bedrooms. So this will say have 3 bedrooms. Then I'll have bathrooms. And then this will have, let's say, 2.5 bathrooms. Then I'll have the sale type. And then this is going to be for sale, written like this, because this is the way that it expects to receive this data. I'm going to have the home type. And then the home type is going to be house. And then I'm going to have the main photo. And then I'm going to have photo _1. Then photo 2. And photo 3. And then these, instead of being the text inputs, I'm going to change these to be files. So that way we can upload images to these. And then we're also going to have is published. And then for that, I'll do something like false, let's say. So now I'm going to select a photo for my main photo. And then here I'll do this house01.jpg. These are just random images I grabbed off Google by typing things like house images and house interior images. So grab whatever images you want. And then I'm going to select for all of these. So I have 3 interior photos. And now that we have all the data, now I can send off this request. And there we go, success. Listing created successfully. So all this data was passed correctly. So now we need a way to retrieve this listing. So let's go ahead and now implement that logic. So I'm going to go back to my code, and then I'm going to start working inside of this get. So again, I'm going to wrap all of this in a try except in case if anything goes wrong. And if anything goes wrong, I'll return an error response. It'll just say something went wrong when retrieving listing. And I'll do like retrieving listing or listing details, something like that. And then in this try part, we're going to retrieve the user making this request. And then also want to make sure that this is a realtor user. So we're going to do this exact same if check to see if they have that is realtor flag set. And then if they don't, we're going to send back this 403 response. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to retrieve the slug, which is going to come from a query parameter. Also, I'll close up that side window just so we can have a little more space. So I'm going to retrieve this from request.queryparams.get. And I'm going to get slug. So this is what it's going to be called inside of the query parameter. So the way that's going to work is we're going to have something like API/listing/manage. This is going to be a GET request, and then it might not have a slug, or if it does, it's going to be passed like so, as a query parameter, and then it will just be whatever the slug is. So that's the way it would look. And then after that, I'm going to check if not slug. So if we don't have a slug, we're just going to send back all the listings. So I can do that with listing.objects.filter, and then I'm going to filter where the realtor is equal to user.email. So we're going to retrieve all of the listings associated with this realtor who's making the request. And then another nice thing to do is maybe just order this by the date created. So I'm going to also chain on here an order by. And then I'm going to order by minus date underscore created. That way we have the latest one showing up first. So that way it's just organized in a very particular way. And then after that, I'm going to serialize this data and send it back. And then also I'm noticing I didn't pass a status code here. So let me also do that real quick. So status is status.htp 500 internal server error. So anyway, let's now create a serializer so that we can serialize this listing data and send it back in a response. So inside of this listing, I'm going to make a serializers.py file. And then I'm going to import from Rest Framework. I'm going to import serializers. And then I'm also going to import my listing model. So from .models, I'm going to import listing. Then I'm going to create a class, which I'm going to call listing serializer. I'm going to pass in serializers.model serializer. And then in here, I'm going to have the class meta. And then I'm going to have model, which I'm going to set to my listing model. And then the fields that I want to serialize. And then in this case, actually, I want to just serialize all the fields. So I'm going to do it like so. So double underscore all, double underscore in quotes. And that's just going to serialize everything. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to go back to my views, close up that side window, scroll up to the top and make sure I import that serializer. So from .serializers, I'm going to import my listing serializer. Then I'm going to scroll down to here. So I want to store this inside of a variable, which I'm going to call listing. And then I'm going to do listing serializer. And then I'm going to pass in this listing. And I'm also going to pass in this many equals true. That way this is going to be a list. And then I'm going to overwrite this listing variable with this serialized listing data. So this right here is going to be sent in something like a list. And then this list is just going to have the serialized data. So it's going to have things like the ID, which is going to be some value. Then we're going to have things like the title, and then so forth. And then we're going to have potentially a bunch of these sort of listings. So it's going to be something like this. This is what this many equals true does for us. And then I'm going to return this inside of a response. So I'm going to return a response. And then here we're going to have some piece of data called listings. And then this is going to hold that list. So the way that we can pass this data is by doing listing.data. So we have to chain on this .data, and that's going to be that serialized data. So then in the response, this listing right here is what's going to hold this list of values, which is the listing data. And then I'm also going to set a status, which is going to be status.htp 200 OK. Now this right here is going to be in the case where a slug was not passed in the query parameters. But if a slug was passed, then we're going to continue on right here with that. And then we're going to retrieve that particular listing with that slug, and then we're going to send that back in a response, assuming that it exists. So that's the first thing we have to check. So if listing.objects.filter, where realtor is equal to user.email and slug is equal to slug, because we need to also pass this in here, because we don't want to pass a slug for a listing that belongs to another realtor and then retrieve that. We don't want to have access to another realtor's listing data. So we're also going to pass this in here when we filter. And then I'm going to do a .exists. So this right here is going to see if this does exist. I want to check if it does not exist, and if that's the case, I'm just going to return an error response. So I'm going to return a response. I'm just going to have an error, and it's going to say listing not found. And I'm going to have a status of status.http 404 not found. And then if this passes, we're going to continue on. So I'm going to retrieve the listing by doing listing.objects.get in this case, because I want to not have this in a list, but as a dictionary instead. So then I'm going to pass realtor is equal to user.email, and then slug is slug. And then I want to serialize this and return it. So I'm going to store this in a variable. Then I'm going to do listing is listing serializer, pass in listing. And in this case, I'm not going to do the many equals true because I don't want this to be a list. I just want it to be a dictionary, which is going to be sent back and then treated like an object in something like JavaScript, let's say, if you're dealing with a front-end framework. And then here I'm going to return a response. And it's going to have a listing piece of data, which is going to be the listing.data. And here we're going to have a status of status.http 200 OK. And there we are. So this is now all fully implemented. So the next step is just to test out that this is working. So we can go back here. I can create a new endpoint. So it's going to be to the same endpoint as right over here. So I'm just going to copy that, paste it in here. It's going to be localhost 8000/API/listing/manage. But in this case, it's going to be a GET request. And then I'm going to save that. And then here I'm just going to have something like retrieve listing or listing detail belonging. Actually, let's shorten this up a little bit. Retrieve realtor listing or listing detail. That's how I'm going to save this. And then if we send this off as is, we're going to get this authentication credentials were not provided. So let's go into this one right here. Go into my headers. I'm just going to grab this exact same header with the bearer and then the access token. And actually, let me test out when we have a normal user trying to do this. That's actually how I'm going to go about it. So we already sent off a request here. So this is the login for a normal user. So I can just grab this access token just so that we can make sure that our authorization is working correctly here. So inside of the headers, I'm going to pass an authorization header where I have bearer. I'm going to paste in this right here, send off this request. There we go. User does not have necessary permissions for creating this listing data. So now let's go pass a correct access token. So one belonging to a realtor. Just going to copy that. And then I'm going to paste it right into here. Then save that. So right now, if we send this without a slug, so what's going to happen is we're just going to retrieve this listing, which is going to be a list, which is going to have all of the listings that this realtor created, which in this case is just one because we only created one. And that's this right over here. Now, if we do pass a slug, so if I have something like slug is equal to, and then let me just copy the slug I have here. So if I pass something invalid and then send that off, so listing not found, also I ended up misspelling that. So let's actually fix up that typo real quick. So that is right over here, listing not found. There we go. So if I send this off, oh my goodness, I spelled it wrong twice. Amazing. Let's try that one more time. There we go. Listing not found. All right, so now let's go past the correct slug. So that's going to be this right here. And then I'm going to send that off. And there we go. We get this listing where then we get back an object, which has all of the details of this listing. So now another thing I want to test out is I'm going to register another realtor account. So this one I'm going to call something like Tom Smith. So I'm going to register this. There we go, realtor account created successfully. And then I'm going to log in with this Tom Smith. So I'm going to open up this login for realtor. I'm going to pass in Tom Smith here. I'm going to send this off. I'm going to grab this access token. I'm going to go back to this retrieve realtor listing or listing detail. I'm going to pass in this access token. So if I send this off, listing not found, because it does not belong to this realtor account. It belongs to my Bob Smith account. So Tom Smith does not have access to this data, which is why we end up getting this. And also if I don't pass a slug, we're going to get the exact same thing. So if I send this off, listings is empty. So that's what we expect. It has to belong to the realtor. So perfect. We ended up hitting the goal of this video. So I'm just going to close up these files just to clean things up a little bit. So now that we hit the goal of this video, our next step is going to be to now have some endpoints in place for retrieving the listings and the listing details for published listings, and these are going to be endpoints for normal users. So that's going to be the goal for the next video, but that's everything I wanted to cover in this video in terms of what we implemented here. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you haven't yet, please hit that like button. It goes a long way to help a channel like mine grow and get recognized so others can benefit from the videos I release as well. Also, I have links in the description that you can check out. I have one for an e-commerce course that you can check out if you're interested in learning to develop an application like that. I also have a link for joining my Web Development Kings Facebook group. That way, if you want to personally ask me something, then you can go right ahead and do that, and I'll happily help you out. It doesn't cost you anything, so if you're scratching your head about something, then you can go right ahead and ask me to help you out. Only questions I probably won't answer are if you want to help me build some kind of personal project, as I don't quite have the time for that sort of thing. You can also post something in the group itself. That way, other developers in the group can help you out as well. The group is all about growing your expertise as a developer, so if you're interested in that, then go right ahead, click that link in the description, and join the family. Also, if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, turn on those notification bells, that way you don't miss out when I release a new video, and I'll see you in the next one.